Welcome to the Sub 1000 Recruitment Podcast. With so much of the recruitment industry conversation aimed at big enterprise talent acquisition teams, we decided recruiters at smaller everyday organizations need to be heard. In 2023, we launched our free-to-join Sub 1000 online community. We have thousands of in-house recruiters and HR professionals from everyday organizations who recruit less than 1,000 staff a year, in some cases less than 100. And if you are listening to this, you've probably guessed the next bit. We've also launched a podcast to hear direct from those recruiters. Their stories, insights and experiences about how they get the job done on a limited budget with limited support in either a small team or perhaps completely on their own. Tune in every fortnight to hear from your direct peers. And if you want to get involved, join our free online community at sub1000.com. This week's episode is sponsored by our friends at Personio. Personio is the flexible HR platform that adapts to how you work. Try it today.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of the Sub 1000 podcast. I am here. I keep saying this to almost everyone I interview, but a colleague and friend I've met at various times, plenty of workshops. So I've met Amy quite a few times, but I'm going to let Amy introduce herself because she'll know her background. That's where we start every episode of these podcasts. So Amy, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience today?
Yes, of course. Thank you. My name's Amy Green. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you very much for having me here today. I was just trying to think then frantically during the introduction how long I've done recruitment for, and I think I've been in the industry coming up to 15, 16 years now. It always flies by, doesn't it? I don't think, well, like everybody who does recruitment, I'm sure it was never something that I wanted to particularly had designs on as a child. I wanted to be a Spanish teacher, and I speak Spanish not very well, so that wasn't going to be something that we followed. But I actually fell into recruitment when I had a period of illness, and I was not well enough to work, but I would take little bits of contracting work here and there when I was able to. And I worked for an agency that's quite prominent in Leeds city centre. And I went in one day to hand my timesheet in back in the days of no online. And they said to me one day, "You could do this. We've got a position for an admin or system administrator," I think it was at the time. So reluctantly, I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure. It's a different industry." But I took the position because it was temp work and I was desperate. And here I am all those years later. So I kind of worked through my way in different sectors. Goodness, I've done everything from agency, so from revenues and benefits, working with a lot of council work, a lot of private sector, moving into education, did that for a couple of years, and into health, where I've managed teams, really moving outside of that agency piece then and working on site for clients, but being sort of like the third party in between, and really implementing systems, implementing strategy, implementing products to get things off the ground and make things a little bit better for people. So that's probably what I've done for like the past how many years are we now? Probably 2 or 3 years. I also should have mentioned as well, I've worked in charity, which is where I got a really good understanding, I suppose, of a lot of the things that hopefully we'll talk about today, like the ED&I and the authentic self. And I had some great role models there that then helped me to move into the next phase of my life and my career, and be able to manage things and implement strategy and stuff. So that's a very long-winded answer.
That's very good. I thought we was going to have the first ever Spanish edition of the podcast.
Absolutely not. Nope, that's all you're getting.
I'm on a streak of 260 something days on Duolingo for Spanish. We've got a Spanish team, so we're trying. A few of us are trying. They all speak brilliant English, but we're trying to sort of make a bit of an effort. So we're getting there slowly. But yeah, what a great background and experience. So we'll share your LinkedIn profile in the notes so people can go check that out. But yeah, I think it's really interesting the fact that you've almost started without being rude, but like many people do, start right at the bottom in like a temp position in an agency, and when you see the heights you've got to, it's like you've really built a fantastic career. So and obviously I guess it's what we're going to get into. So before we start asking the questions, how have you built that knowledge is the interesting bit, because obviously you've learned lots of stuff, and sometimes with recruitment it's not like you can go to university and understand it. So I think a lot of it comes down to like people's approach to learning. So so this isn't a question we prepared or thought about in advance. I thought I'd throw this for you.
I think really I like talking. Look, I'm in recruitment. I suppose I'm quite nosy as a person as well. If my friends are listening, they'll be laughing at that one. And I guess I just, I remember recruiting for asking, somebody called me up and said, do you recruit for lift engineers? And I said, yes, we can recruit for anything. And I had no idea. And I'll never forget taking this job spec for this lift engineer, and they may as well have been speaking German to me because I had no idea at all. But I went home and I learned, and I looked it up and I asked questions. And, also as I was talking to candidates, they needed a NEBOSH or some health and safety qualification. As I was talking to candidates, I was getting them to sort of qualify what I knew and, that type of thing. So I suppose really it's observing those behaviours from managers, from peers, not being afraid to ask those questions. I've never been afraid to say that I'm quite ambitious, and put myself in those situations. I've always asked for extra bits of work when I was probably more junior than I am now. I've always asked, well, this was my project. Could I be involved in maybe presenting that back to the executive? So I get a feel for what that looks like, as a 26-year-old somebody, I wouldn't have known what that was, and unless I've been given those opportunities. So I guess really it's asking those questions and not being afraid. Maybe finding a mentor. Like I said, in my previous employers, I've been really, really lucky to have some really strong female, shout out to the ladies, role models there, that have really kind of seen my potential perhaps and harnessed it. Because I'll be the first to say that I can get quite carried away with things sometimes. I'm quite excited and ideas driven, and it's taken some of those great ladies to rein me back in a little bit and said, that's a great idea, Amy, but let's think about the cost. It usually is the thing with me, it's I want to do everything, and they're like, well, that's going to cost a lot of money, so what can we do? But being really receptive to that feedback and actually taking it as a gift, without sounding too pros driven or whatever, taking that feedback as it's meant. It's meant to be something that you take and you work on. So being really receptive, and not a lot of things faze me. It's kind of like water off a duck's back, and I think if someone is taking the time to give you feedback, then you should accept it that way. People aren't being negative. People are just trying to be nice and and help you get on.
Yeah sounds like I'm always trying to teach my kids, you've got to be pushing yourself to out of your comfort zone a little bit. You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
So,
I think if you don't take those chances, there were a couple of times in the past couple of years actually where I've moved on, and I've had to move to further my career because there weren't any opportunities where I was. And friends and colleagues have said, you do it quite easily sometimes, and I'm like, well, I must be really good at hiding that then, because deep down I am panicking. We won't use the words that I'm actually, I am panicking my socks off. And the same as when, you meet a new team for the first time, yes, it's all smiles and rainbows and everything's fine, but I'm doing that swan thing underneath, I'm pedaling, but, not necessarily fake it until you make it. But I think if you don't put yourself in those positions, you're never going to learn. So, believe in yourself, and the rest will kind of come.
Yeah. And I guess, if you've not been, some people might be raised in a certain way to been told they're brilliant, and everything's great, and they're destined. Maybe if they're like parents are, also brilliant, and they've gone to really posh schools. And I think a lot of the time going to private schools or public schools is maybe gets you to a level where it's about building your confidence in many cases, that you can do anything. And I think if you've not come from that background, then you've just got to discover that over time, that okay, this doesn't feel great, but it will get better, and I will learn. And just because I guess maybe as well understanding that you're meant to feel that, other people feel this as well, because I think everyone feels like an imposter sometimes.
Definitely. And I think that was a big thing actually that I had to learn. So I grew up in an area of Leeds that's probably not got the best reputation, shall I say, and was raised by a wonderful single mother. So we didn't maybe have as many opportunities. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. On paper, we were maybe children that were, destined to go down a certain path. And we were always told, you know, my mum was instilled that in us, you know, that just because this is where you're from doesn't mean that's where you're going. You know, you can do anything you want to do, apart from be a Spanish teacher, it seems. But you know, you can do kind of anything you want to do. You know, you can kind of get to where you want to be. And yes, I've always had to work a little bit harder because I didn't go to university. I dropped out of college. I didn't have a very good time there. Maybe that's something that is for another conversation. But I had lots of mental health issues when I was younger. You know, and I think that was, you know, 20 years ago now, so it's not as prevalent as it is today, which I suppose is why I'm so passionate about some of the stuff that hopefully we'll get on to talk about. You know, so I had to kind of fight through that, you know, and really, you know, have that belief in myself, really. But, you know, that was definitely instilled in me as a young person. But I think you're right. You're navigating life as well as navigating a career and understanding that it is okay, because, you know, even the best people, you know, I love Beyonce, and I'm sure she has those situations before she steps on stage where she thinks, am I going to be able to do this? You know, and, you know, like I do before we came on the podcast today, I was like, deep breaths, I've got my notes, everything will be fine. So it doesn't matter what it is, you know, you've still got that. But I think your passion and, you know, your self-worth, if you can find it, will definitely shine through.
Great. Well, we're definitely going to clip some of this and share it with, and hopefully some people early in their career will, you know, will take a lot from it. So you've obviously touched on the ED&I stuff a little bit. We were talking about social mobility and, you know, finding out we've got more in common. I'm also for a single parent family, and, you know, your mum sounds like some of the things very similar to what my mum would have said. So I guess, you know, this was a subject that wasn't hugely talked about, certainly not when we were at school necessarily. So where does this passion of yours come from with this area? Because you are quite authentic in this area. It just comes through.
I think like I say, it's from probably lived experience. It's from life experience. I about 6 years ago now, I should know the exact time, but I don't. 6 or 7 years ago, I woke up with Bell's palsy, which was a paralysis of one side of your face. To me, it was the right side of my face. Could not move my face whatsoever. How many times am I going to say face? But yeah, completely paralysed, and a long road to recovery. Really, really long. Had to just, you know, mourn the loss of my face. You know, I can't smile properly now. You know, and lots of things that I could do previously that I could go out after work, and now I really have to think about things. You know, so if I have a really busy day the next day, then, you know, and friends want to go for dinner, then I have to take a rain check and think that's not the most sensible time to do it, but I could do it on a weekend because I've got a Saturday off, those type of things. So I think that inevitably puts you in a different headspace, because I never really thought about this is a disability, but I never really thought about, you know, because I was just living my life, right? You know, I was a 36-year-old. I had absolutely nothing to worry about. You know, I was earning good money. It was fine. So that kind of put me in a different headspace. You know, I've certainly always had that empathy in terms of, you know, like I said, I had battles with my mental health, you know, and friends and colleagues had, but I think it just made me start to think about things from a different perspective, really. And just have that passion for, you know, that authenticity of, you know, being, I think sometimes companies and staff really overcomplicate the ED&I space. It's such an important thing, and I think sometimes people are very scared of getting it wrong. But it's about having that authentic voice of finding, and I'm not saying I'm the expert on it because I'm absolutely not, but having that, having somebody in your organisation or teams of people in your organisation that have either got that lived experience or have understood the processes that people that go through, you know, that have listened to colleagues and really taken people's voices in, you know, really helped to kind of set that strategy up or that inclusion. But also I realised as I got older that it's something that you have to be passionate about, because especially at the moment, you know, with a lot of the things that are going on politically, which, you know, I know it's not a political podcast, you know, it's the right thing for people, right? You know, it's standing up for that underrepresented voice. So it's the right thing to do. So therefore, you know, it's something we all should do, really.
Yeah, when I train on ED&I myself, I really don't do a lot of, well, I don't do any slides about why. You know, I just, that you can go get research and evidence that will talk to people about diversity of thought, you know, and about the benefits, the underlying revenue benefits to the company. And we will talk about diversity of thought because that's an important factor to move through. But I really don't spend much time because you should do it because it's the right thing to do, to live in a fair society where everyone gets a fair crack.
Absolutely, and that is it. there's nothing to add to that, is there? You know, in a nutshell, it's the right thing to do, and we should all want to be like that. You know, we move on in conversations, we move on in thought processes as the world changes. You know, I am not the same person at 41 as I was at 21. Unfortunately, put on a few extra pounds, but you know, in terms of thought process and whatever else, you know, we do move on, and we wouldn't be humans if we didn't evolve and we didn't change. But we have to try and bring people, you know, along with us, and just show people it's a different way of doing things. You know, when half of I shouldn't even say half the time, most of the time when I've spoken to leaders about that, or people that can make the changes, I've been very lucky, I suppose, and they've just responded with, well, get on with it then, you know, not in a nasty way, you know, that's fantastic, that's something we want to do, please implement that, you know, and come back to us and let us know how you get on. So I think it's just having that courage to listen to, you know, specifically at the moment with, you know, with a lot of the transgender issues, listening to colleagues, listening to friends, listening to things that you see online, you know, and being a voice, being an ally, you know, and using your voice for good. You know, I feel like I'm a good orator. You know, I want to use my voice. How do I use that in the best way? How do I amplify voices that are scared to speak up? You know, and also I do have privilege by being a white straight woman. You know, so kind of using that as well for, don't want to say for good, because that's a cheesy thing to say, but you know, just using your voice in a way that helps support and be an ally to others.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, I've got even more privilege being a white male, so it's somewhat getting comfortable with that, to say like, okay, well, you know, I need to listen to a lot of people, but you know, if I've got privilege, if I've got power, I should be using that for good.
And that's the thing, isn't it? You know, I remember the awful, senseless stuff with George Floyd, and actually a lot of the stuff that came out of that. You know, a lot of my friends of colour were, you know, having these really open conversations. You know, when they would say things to me like, you know, you have privilege. Actually, it was something that didn't sit right with me to start off with, because I'm not sure I fully understood. But the more I took the time, you know, to listen and have those really open conversations, because again, in an ED&I space, that's what you need, right? You know, you need to have those safe spaces and those protected spaces to have conversations, and without barriers, you know, and to be able to be pointed in the right direction, or if it's something that you say that's maybe you know, to be challenged on certain viewpoints, you know, and to be kind of taken along with where people should be. So I think, again, you know, that was something that came out of the pandemic for me. You know, I'd never really been questioned on that before, and you know, again, that's quite difficult, because you know, I know I previously said it takes a lot to kind of upset me. It was something that I was, well, actually, you know, I am a good person. Well, yes, you are, but you know, have you thought about it in this way? Which I absolutely hadn't. And then as soon as you're kind of receptive to that then the whole space takes on such a, you know, a better meaning, you know, and just allows you to, like I say, move on and hopefully do things for good.
So, what do you see are the mistakes that either organizations you've worked in, or maybe organizations that you can then see what they're doing in regards to, you know, what do you see as the key mistakes that organizations are making with it?
I just think people think sometimes that they have a bit of a tick box, and they know that they, you know, they need to make this higher. And you know, I think back to a board, for example, and they'll say, oh, well, oh, we're diverse, we've got a woman on the board. Okay, well, you know, could we go further? You know, that's a great start, but that doesn't mean everything stopped and we can, you know, go back to the beginning again. You know, so very much tick box exercise, or they already have a preconceived idea of what they think that should be, and they don't listen to staff, and they've not got staff networks, or they have those staff networks, but they're not really, things don't get going. I'm part of a really great forum here in Leeds, which is the Carers Network within Leeds, and they have some great examples of how they've sort of their members have launched their ED&I forums, so you know, their staff networks, and a lot of their participants have actual sponsors for a lot of these projects, which means it's a director or an exec member that is really passionate about that project, and they co-sign that, so they're going to get that in front of the people that, you know, that need to be able to make the change, because it's great sitting around a table, but what's the point if things aren't going to move on? So I think that that's really, really important. They have to be invested. Some workplaces won't want to move on, and that's not okay. But that's, I suppose, down to them. But the ones that do, and the ones that do it well, are the ones that listen to their staff, listen to experts that they get in. It's not just about ticking a box to get to a plan, to get to a certain level because you're looking for investment, or you're looking to grow the company, and you can put it on your careers page and say, oh, we've got this certain standard. That's great, but again, what does it mean in practice? So I think those are the ones that kind of slip up, and they should just be quite receptive to stuff, and then decide what they can do. And they're not going to be able to do everything. When you think of like menopause policies, or time off for certain things which maybe come under EVP, but that they all are kind of intertwined. Extra leave, all of these things cost money, so I do understand that. But I think it's about understanding what you can do and doing those things well, and having an aspiration to get to further things in the future.
How do you think organizations choose what they want to do? Because one of the things I think is plenty of organizations don't have the confidence in these areas. And if you don't have the confidence, the obvious one to pick is gender, is to do something male, female, because all the language within it is quite easy.
Yeah.
We all know women, we know men, it's sort of easy, but you might not have had enough conversations with someone from the LGBTQ community. You might find that whole area like something that is, you just feel really inexperienced in. So I guess the question is, how does an organization get the confidence to pick the more challenging aspects and the more challenging areas of ED&I?
Good question. And whereas I wouldn't consider myself an expert in by any means, it's something that I'm passionate about. I guess it's talking to your staff, and listening to what's right about what they are interested in, and what's important to them, but also who are you as an organization. So, I know when I've worked with you, many of times, you've said who you are as an organisation, and that runs through right from whoever it is that I speak to, whether it's Amy that's calling to check in on some ATS stuff that we've done, or whether it's some of the other things that the community have done. That culture runs through the organisation. So who you are as a person, as a person, and also as an organisation. So what do you, if you put a mirror up to hireful, what would that reflect out to people? What would you hope that your employer said about you? And I guess that's maybe where I would start if I had a business, which I don't want because I'm not very good with numbers. But if I had that business, I would say, what would people, if somebody worked for me and was employed by Amy Green, what would I want them to say about me? That my ethics were this, that, and the other. And I guess it's it's like I said before, it's having those couple of things that you can do straight away, and then having the aim to, when we've billed this much, or when revenue hits this much, we then maybe would like to look at introducing this type of thing, or we would like to introduce this type of thing, or we've already got flexible working policies, and that means that if people need a little bit of extra time off for certain things, then they work that time back, or introducing things that don't necessarily cost money immediately, that you can kind of claim back and sort of work back that way. So I think again, talking, you've always got to make a decision at the end of the day, but just asking people. And I'm not sure about you, but in certain places I've worked at, where your voice is listened to, you feel so much more valued. You stay a little bit more. It has so much more of a knock-on effect.
Just, it sounds like that was a really good answer for like how to manage up. Because if you're talking to the executives and you're able to say to them, this, what legacy do you want this organization, this business to be? You're probably going to make a bunch of money. Yeah, great. Maybe you're already doing that. But when people look back at this organization, if they've worked here, or if they know of the organization, what are they going to think? How is history going to judge this organization?
Yeah,
ED&I is going to be a big one.
Yeah, and I think, again, how does it make you feel? Is it a place where you can bring your authentic self to work? If you are, and again, I mentioned this because it's a hot topic, if you are a trans person, can you bring your authentic self to work? And is that going to be okay? And if it isn't, how do we fix that? If you are a person of colour and you work in this organisation, how do you feel? And again, there's lots of different variants that we could look at there, but they're just two that I've come across in the past 6 months that really stick in my mind. And again, as we've said, it's doing the right thing by people at the end of the day, and just ensuring that that's there and voices are listened to. And actually, when voices are raised, they're taken really seriously as well, because people aren't just saying it for the sake of saying things. They're mentioning it and they're having the courage to mention it because it's important to them. Therefore, it should be taken and acted on appropriately.
Yeah. And those conversations are obviously really important. I'll do a little shout out to something that we're rolling out here at hireful, just internally. We're spending about $50 a month on a tool called Incognito. I'll add it into the show notes. And what it allows is for just a one-way conversation, anonymous conversation. So it's not like posted on Glassdoor. It's completely anonymous, but it's just between you and the organization. So they can raise any concerns they've got. They can raise, if they've seen, they might have seen discrimination. They might have seen what they consider bias. And they might just be putting it under their hat and going, So, yeah, I mean, obviously the conversations are great, but sometimes people haven't got the confidence to have the conversations. And that's a good starting point, because I think as well, like your experience of the organization might be very different to other people's.
Yeah, and that's really important to recognise, that I have exactly had that, when someone's maybe approached me about certain things and I've taken it away afterwards and thought, well, that's not my experience. I love working here, but that's maybe because the HR or the people team are role modelling the behaviour that we would like to see in other areas. And actually, the frontlines experience of something is very different. I always remember feeling really guilty in the pandemic I worked for a charity at the time. And I always felt very guilty that a lot of our frontline staff were going out day in and day out, and they were in people's homes and they were coming into contact with people. And I was sat in my apartment. Yes, I was on my own, but I was very, very safe. So my experience and worries in the pandemic were very different to what theirs were. So, it's kind of meshing that up and also understanding that, and how do you bring the two together? You might not always be able to do that. The idea is for harmony, right? But there might have to be two separate things, and that's also okay.
Yeah. So because we've got a few extra topics to talk about, we're talking about people's different experiences. So maybe we can segue onto EVP, so employee value proposition, because I'd be interested to see what you've done around EVP, what you've learned around EVP. It's a really open question, but obviously that's an area where once again employees can have very different perspectives.
Yeah, I think again it's going to be the theme of this podcast. It's that authenticity. Again, who are you as a business? And don't try and sell something that you're not. And also don't try and sell something as a benefit if it isn't. There's lots of conversations on LinkedIn sometimes around free tea and coffee and free fruit and free parking. Is that a benefit anymore? Yes, it's a perk because it's something that you don't have to pay for. I don't drink tea or coffee, and I don't eat a lot of fruit either, and I don't drive. Therefore, those are three things that are not expensive to me. I'm being quite facetious there, but you kind of see those. But the extra holidays are, the some days off for volunteering are really important to people. Parental leave, shared parental leave policy, menopause policy, lots of other things again that we're kind of working on. So I think it's about that authentic and true voice, and also hearing from your staff. Why do they work here? That's a project that we're actually doing at the moment where I work. I'll be very honest, our careers page is very heavy with the exec, which is wonderful because they've got some fantastic experience and they're at the top and they drive everything, but there's no voice from that level down, and the people that are actually making the decisions, we're not hearing from them. So that's a project that we're currently doing to have like a day in the life, and lots of work around that and celebrating staff successes as well. Did someone get married? Did someone have a baby? Has somebody been with us for a long time? Just an authentic voice, I think, that kind of runs through the organisation.
Yeah, truly. And there's something I've been playing with recently. I love my tech, but voice forms. So online surveys that are you can actually answer just by pushing the button and doing an audio. I think it's a fantastic way. You're making it as easy as possible for people to tell you their story. So I'll put that in the notes as well. So if you're in the process of getting any feedback and you want your staff just to share with you, I think voice forms, they'll probably find that, because everyone's busy, they'll probably find that really, really useful. So,
and actually, you mentioned that triggered something. We had from one of our forums in a place that I used to work, came up a conversation about names and how difficult it is sometimes for people to get names right. And actually, what's in a name, it's so important. We all have one. My name is probably the most English sounding name in the world. the amount of times people ask me how to spell my name, because there's a French way, there's an E on the end of green, there's all sorts. So it was actually our director that came up with something that you can put in your email signature and just click a button that says, this is how you pronounce a name. And then that got on to lots of conversations from African colleagues who had names that meant wonderful things in their home countries. And we got into, loads of conversations around there. And it was really, really eye-opening and really nice to hear those histories of, names that have been in the family for such a long time, and, translations into English and what things like that meant. We had doctors and kings and all sorts when we heard those stories. So again, that was, with permission, something that was captured, we shared within the organisation. And it's just a talking point, the same as pronouns, right? A couple of years ago, nobody used those. They started to pop up on badges and we were like, what's that? Not because people were questioning it to start off with, but they just didn't know what it was. And now it's really, everybody does it. And I think you sometimes have to be quite bold and take that leap to put things out there, and people, they'll catch on and people start using it. And suddenly it's just the norm, which is probably what it should have been for a long time. But it takes somebody quite brave to say, this is what we should be doing. People adopt it, like myself and yourself, because we're allies and we support the networks. And then it just becomes regular, ingrained in society.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so much of so much of employer brand seems to be inferences. Seems to be what we'll do is we will do this. We'll maybe change some part of benefits and we'll put this into the benefit. And actually, I think what people don't realise is they're actually signposting who they are as an organisation. It makes there'll be that people who read a lot into it and understand a lot more about the organisation, about their values, about what they believe in, just by doing something quite simple in regards to, or potentially quite small. But using your pronouns highlights that you're an ally of that community.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't do anything more than that, it doesn't need to. It's that alone is very important.
Yeah, definitely. I would fully agree with that. I've sat round tables with HR directors where they've kind of, again, it's been a tick box, so it's so we need to improve the careers page. So what we're going to do is this, so we need to improve this. Well, we're already doing that. We'll say we do this, and we're already doing that. We're doing this. But actually, this is a time to really look at everything, from a blanket approach, from start to end. And we're not going to be able to change everything, but the things that we can change. And I think having that, I know I've said it before, but really having that aspiration of where you would like to be, or that plan of where you would like to go to, just speaks volumes, so you can keep updating it. It should be a document that's a live document that, that grows with you as you move with it throughout the company. But you're absolutely right. The pronouns thing is something that's come back to me a lot in interviews, when candidates have reached out, either whether they've been successful or not, and have just said, by you introducing yourself that way, I knew I could be comfortable, so if that's what I can do, then I'll do it all day long.
Like an so not so secret sort of little wink and a nudge, but it's much more.
Yeah.
It's much more like much more blatant than that. Okay, great. Yeah. We're not joining. You have to join the Freemasons or anything. So when it comes to that employer brand, then obviously you're talking about how it knits together with diversity and inclusion. So obviously that's a key part of it, when you're presenting your organization. How have you gone about that with past organizations? Have you had to sort of convince them that this is an external thing as well as an internal thing? Have there been any challenges?
Yeah, I think it's that culture, isn't it? So you do one thing on paper, but you do another thing in the business. So I think you sometimes have to have those conversations, and certainly it is challenging, and like you say, managing up. And I am quite direct at times. I think it's my northernness. I have it in the back of my head at times, but it's speaking on layman's terms, isn't it? So this has happened. This is how it made us feel. It from the outside looking in. I know that wasn't the intent, but this is how it looked. So that's not great, is it? Because on our website it says that we're this, and by us doing that, we're absolutely not that. Or this situation happened in an interview where somebody asked some ridiculous questions that they absolutely shouldn't have asked, and I was observing that. So as I fed that back, the manager didn't see the issue with that. So it's been not being afraid, to kind of have those conversations. Sometimes it's admitting that things are a lost cause, because you're not going to be able to change a company's direction. But you would hope that you could make, certain inroads and certain ways of moving along. But I think it's about having that that tenacity about you sometimes to kind of challenge things when you know that they're not right, and sort of, again, the whole thread of this really is speak up, and kind of use your voice, but knowing how to use it. And I think that's where my mentors have been really good in the past, because I am very northern, and I would sometimes go in and really fly off the handle and say, this is not right. But learning through experience, of how to manage things, and constructively is probably the word I was looking for there. Give feedback and formulate things, and not replying to an email straight away. Taking the 10 minutes and walk away. And coming back to it. But again, not being afraid to challenge and have those difficult conversations, and kind of keep pushing back as much as you can. And I also have been known in the past to say, well, I don't agree with that communication. I've pushed back as far as I can. If you still want it to go out, then I politely request that someone else sends it, because it's not going out with my name on it.
Yeah,
because I believe that strongly about something, and maybe this is not advice for everybody. It's something that's worked with me in the past, because that's who I am as a person. But I and that was a very extreme case. But I believed so strongly in the message that we were sending. It wasn't. And actually, when push came to shove, and that person then had to send it, it suddenly disappeared and wasn't sent. And it was sent, but much better worded, and lots of things taken out and whatever else. And it was one of those silent times where I just sort of took an internal win, didn't really mention it around the office. But I think sometimes you have to have that courage of your conviction. And obviously I'm saying a lot of this without context, so maybe listeners or watchers will be thinking, oh, so maybe don't follow my advice without knowing the full story. I might tell you one day, hit me up on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think it's having that courage, isn't it, to kind of say, well, I'm not happy with that. So if you want to send it, then that's great, but not from me.
Well, companies have their own values, and they're a great one to sort of point them back towards. But we've all got our own values as well, and you've got to say, look, this isn't me. I'm not signing up for this, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I could bore you with my own story. There are some challenging times where you've got to, once again, I've sort of said things internally, right? I won't. If I hear that in the future, I'm going to say something, and then and you actually have to.
Yeah.
That's what brings about the real change. It's not the legislation, and legislation helps from the government and stuff, but it's when individuals start, speaking up.
It is, and it's challenging colleagues, isn't it? Again, in a not very recently in my past, I had colleagues that were talking about certain things and using language it just wasn't appropriate, so I'd mentioned it, nipped it in the bud, and actually they were quite grateful, because they wouldn't have known otherwise. So I think it's having that. For me, it's always been the way that I've approached a situation. You can inflame the situation even more because you're upset yourself, or you hear that, you kind of take the sting out of it a little bit by stepping back and have those conversations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to be the ones that bring about real change. Sometimes backed up by legislation, it's great. The Carers Act, for example, not at my current organisation, I will say, but in other organisations I've worked for, we'd kind of had that conversation about, carers should have some leave, and we need to have those conversations, and management weren't receptive. If I still worked there now, I would have run into the office with a piece of paper saying, we've legislated for the carers now, we need to be doing something about it. This thing I've been telling you about for the past 10 years, we need to do something about it now.
Yeah. So moving on, talk about some candidate experience. I know that's something we discussed that you wanted to talk about. So how do you look to go about that? How do you make sure that your organisation that you're working with gets that right? Because I guess if you go into a new organisation, I guess that's something you're going to be looking to get right from as early as possible.
Yeah, definitely. So in previous organisations, it's just been sort of looking at that and kind of mapping it from, the second a person sees an advert all the way through to them coming into the business, and looking at it from your perspective, So when I joined a company, what was my experience? How did I feel? Was the application form laborious? Was I kept in touch with? Were my onboarding quite easy? What was my experience when I started on my first day? So I think you usually lived experience, because that's the best thing to do. And then obviously talking to colleagues and stuff. But I think really, yeah, for me, it's about looking at that experience that you've had and having it from the start to the end, and picking up on the things that we can change.
How flexible does that need to be? think about, because once again, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, there's many different types of candidates with different abilities to sort of engage, that might need, obviously reasonable adjustments if they're disabled, but they might just be anxious. They might not have interviewed in a long time. So how do you sort of build something that works for everyone, or allows people to raise their hand perhaps and say, I need a bit of help?
There's so many things, isn't there, to kind of, bring into conversation, and something that actually I think was raised on the sub 1000 community and maybe in a training session recently that we did, but something had come up recently about sharing interview questions before an interview. And I'll be very honest, I'd never heard that before. And my immediate reaction was, why would you do that? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, actually, I can see the value in that, because we're all nervous at interviews or in situations like that. You know what you're going to be asked about. You can relax a little bit more, and certainly speaking to neurodiverse colleagues and friends that are in that space, they said, oh, well, that would really help me, if I got entered into an interview. So, and I also think it's about simplifying things. So we were actually not so long ago, yesterday perhaps, looking at our application forms here, and a lot of the questions that we asked, are they relevant? We're asking for references on an application form now. We ask for references if they're successful at the end. Why are we asking for them twice? And just things like that. Yes, years ago it was seen that you had a really long application form, and the more information we collected, but actually, do we probably just need the name of someone to be able to identify them? Although that gets anonymized anyway, so do we even need that? We need probably a couple of details about where they've worked for conflicts of interest purposes because of the space that we're in, and then just a supporting statement, about where they work. But again, we have colleagues that would find that difficult, or potential applicants. So it's I suppose promoting that on online, that we will have conversations with people. So if somebody is, we're a disability confident provider, so we will have conversations with people where we'll say, just send a CV in, or if you struggle with that, we can signpost them to places that can help with a CV. Suppose that's probably the minimum that we would need, but again, we don't need war and peace around certain things. And again, you said about people feeling anxious before stuff. I always put my telephone number on LinkedIn for things that we're recruiting for. I will have a conversation with anybody. I'd talk to the wall if it needed it, to kind of put people at ease, and talk them through the process. And again, I think it's about that. In the health sector, we always used to have this test called the mum test. And would your care, is the care that's been given, is if your mum was being given that care, would you be happy with it? And that's something that I've kind of taken with me throughout my recruitment journey. If your mum had that experience on the phone, because it's customer service at the end of the day. So she'd rung up and said, I'd like to apply for this janitor position, and you'd given that service, would you be happy that your mum would receive that service? So I think it's putting it from a customer service footing, really, and supporting people as much as we can throughout that process.
I love the mum test. That's an interesting one. I heard something about imagine your managers behind you when you're interviewing. Would they be happy with the questions you're asked, the way you've conducted yourself, and that sort of stuff? And hopefully they would be. So how do you then look, or do you try to make your organisation stand out a little bit? Do you try to shake the candidate in some respects to realise maybe, oh, you're a nice organisation, or this is a different process than normal? Is that something you sort of aim for? And if so, how do you go about that?
I think, again, it's talking to people, isn't it? So let's assume they're being invited for an interview. You're picking up the phone and having a conversation with them before they come. So, it's great, Adrian, that you've been invited to this interview. You'll be meeting Amy. She's the recruitment manager, and she's fairly relaxed. It's a little bit about her. The type of things that you'll be asking, being asked around at this. We use the STAR method. We use competency-based questions, which would be something along the lines of this. If you are an organisation that provides the questions, but you don't need to worry about that because we've sent you the questions over, have a look at those. If you're doing a presentation, I also think that something people miss all the time is how to get to the place. So if it's a difficult place to get to, I'm thinking of a previous organisation now that I worked in. We didn't always have parking, so they had to park somewhere else and walk over. And sometimes we'd miss that from the conversation, and they'd ring really panicked that they'd got there 5 minutes before and the walk was 15. So you'd be hanging out of the window, like directing them in, and then they'd lose self-service halfway through and it'd be a nightmare. So, you know, it's putting those things into people's minds, isn't it? You know, try and arrive 15 minutes early. When you do arrive, we're in a buzzer system, buzz the second floor and ask for this person, so on and so forth. I know it's really straightforward, but I think, again, just putting yourself in that shoes, you know, of, okay, I'm going for this interview and I don't know anything about it. What would I need to know? What would I find useful? Would it be a pin? Would it be what 3 words that some people use? Would it be a link to Google Maps? Should I be WhatsApping them that information? Should I text them that information? Do people even look at emails anymore? You know, like, just really having those conversations with people and letting them know that you're on their side, you know, so it's not an interview is a test, I suppose, but, you know, I want you to do well, you know. And for me, maybe agency recruiters, if you're listening, you know, I'm not an agency recruiter. I'm not on commission. Not that I didn't want you to do well when I was an agency recruiter, but there was always something else in the back of my mind. You know, I work for the company. You know, I really want you to do well. I want to support you. You know, I've got your best interests at heart. You know, this is how we'll support you. I'll meet you on the day. I'll take you around the building. I'm waffling now, but you know, you kind of have that so people know exactly what to expect and they're not walking into anything that's crazy.
Yeah, I love that approach to candidate experience, and I guess you know, if people don't have the time to phone in advance and phone every candidate, you know, I meet so many different recruiters with different pressures and, you know, volume, and then I think they've just got to achieve a similar outcome with very good, you know, automated emails that you put the effort into, so they're the max as helpful as they can be, I guess.
And I think, again, you know, setting the expectations out. So I've been there where you've got 10 interviews on the next day, and all of a sudden it's 6:30 and you really can't work any longer because your partner's taking you out for tea and your mother's screaming at you or whatever else. Sorry, Mum, if you're listening. But, you know, that type of thing. But you will have hopefully have managed your expectations with that candidate enough to say, as I do, I'm really bad at coming back to phone calls because it's not the best. Amy will testify to that, that works in your offices. But I'll always come back to you on email. So drop me an email, you know, that type of thing. But you're absolutely right. If you've got a really good, thorough email that they can find all the information in. But I would try and say as well, try and find that time, even if it's a 5-minute phone call and they don't answer, you could just quickly leave them a voicemail. It does mean the world to a lot of people. So it's managing that time. I know it's not always possible, and I'm by no means perfect because I run out of time like everybody else. But yeah, try and schedule those in where you can.
Yeah, it's that personal touch. Yeah. Amy, you've been fantastic. I actually wrote down that, like, inspirational. I genuinely think the story is great. Yeah, no, I think the story is great. I think that your approach to recruitment is really refreshing. You know, some people 15, 16 years in might feel a bit tired, but obviously it sounds like you love every candidate. You give every candidate your very best.
I think it's a passion thing. You know, I mentioned it a bit ago at the start. Feels a long time ago now. It's not even an hour, is it? But yeah, I haven't always had the best of health, and I was really, really down on my luck when I was about 19, 20, and I really, really struggled for a long, long time. And I think that when I eventually found work, and found a job, I realized it was so much more than financial security. You know, it gave me everything that I ever wanted, you know, in terms of freedom. I was able to move out. I got my own home. You know, I just had that independence. And I think it was, in some ways, I suppose this is me giving back, you know, to a lot of people that kind of supported me, but I'm really passionate about it, and that's obviously come across. So I've done my job. But yeah, I think the day-to-day sales and the day-to-day stuff is behind me. You know, kind of done that, but the strategy and the implementation and stuff is where you know, hopefully we'll continue to be in that space. But yeah, it's not a difficult job to do, recruitment, because if it was, I wouldn't do it. It's just, you know, being personable with people, you know, and trying to give them your best. And no doubt there'll be people that have got me on a bad day, and they do exist, definitely. On a Monday before 9, don't try it. But yeah, it's about being as authentic as you can.
Excellent, Amy. Well, I'm pleased we got you on a good day. So you've been a brilliant guest.
That's why we did it in the afternoon, not the morning.
Great. We'll wrap things up there. Thanks a lot for all your insights, Amy. It's been really lovely.
Lovely to talk to you. Take care.